All right, so everybody got this opened up here? All right, so here's Wilson's 14 points, okay? And we're going to type translations and highlight and help you figure out what they're going to come up with. Now, the first one, open covenants of peace must be arrived at, after which there will surely be no private international action or rulings of any kind, but diplomacy shall always frankly and in the public view proceed. All right, and that's a really fancy term, but first of all, let's work on a baseline definition. If you don't know what a word means, take a look up here. If you highlight and then you right click and then do a smart lookup, it'll give you the definition. Okay, a covenant. It's simply an agreement that people make. All right, and covenant is a more serious agreement. And what they're talking about here is that when nations are working out agreements between them, they need to be open. Okay, and here's what we're going to put for our translation on this one: no secret treaties, emphasis on open diplomacy. Okay. And here's the thing, all of Wilson's 14 points, they're kind of adding somebody like on social media, low key talking about certain events. All right. And he didn't want to embarrass anybody in public. So he wrote them like this. But here's a for instance. If you remember in Why Nations Go to War, the author talked about the Kaiser, Wilhelm II, and Tsar Nicholas II sending telegrams to each other. Okay, they were sending personal telegrams talking about the potential for conflict, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, look, those secret telegrams just between you two, that's a problem. What you need to do is have an open diplomatic discussion that everybody can be aware of. All right. Because if you two are just the only ones looking at telegrams and you're talking about potentially going to war with each other, you might make a mistake and misperceive what the other side's doing. All right. But if you've got a whole diplomatic team looking at it, they can be like, hey, that doesn't mean what you think it means. You don't need to get worked up over that. All right. And so Wilson's saying, look, no secret treaties. There should be an emphasis on open diplomacy. All right. By the way, if you don't know, you can highlight too. The highlight button is simply up here. All right. Second one, absolute freedom of navigation on the seas outside of territorial waters alike in peace and war. All right. Who do you think they're adding right there? Who do you think that's directed at? Why did you say Germany? You're right. U-boats. Okay. And we're going to put it like this: safe sea travel for all nations in war or peace. That is definitely directed at Germany and those U-boats. Because remember, ships, American ships, British ships, supply ships, passenger ships are getting sunk. And so Woodrow Wilson's like, hey, safe sea travel for all nations. And perhaps Germany, if they would have paid a little more attention, or they wouldn't have blown up American ships, maybe they could have kept the United States out of this. Okay. Number three, the removal, so far as possible, of all economic barriers and the establishment of an equality of trade conditions. Okay. We're going to translate this by calling it free and fair trade for all nations. Now, this one seems like a no-brainer in some ways because you want free and fair trade. You don't want any barriers in the way of you doing business with another country. However, there's another problem with this. Okay, sir. Absolutely, it does, and that's what we wanted to mention is that hey, how can you say that we want equal trade conditions when what are European nations doing to African nations? Are they giving them equal trade? No. And even the United States, remember, this is Woodrow Wilson's 14-point plan. And is the United States treating all nations fairly? No. Okay. That's definitely not something that people were down with. They're like, hey, we're not going with that. Number four, adequate guarantees given and taken that national armaments will be reduced to the lowest points consistent with domestic safety. All right. What is armaments? Yeah, military weapons. All right. They want to reduce the amount of weapons that each nation has. Okay. And notice it says consistent with domestic safety. Hey, Evan, what's domestic mean? Yeah, not you. Double click it, check it out. We need to reduce weapons to the lowest level consistent with domestic safety. Relating to the running of home, meaning that we should be reducing weapons so that we can defend what? Our homes, essentially. And here's the translation we're going with here. All nations should reduce their military strength only to what they need to defend their nation. Do you think nations are comfortable doing this? Why not, Toby? Yeah, but the idea Woodrow Wilson says, look, if every nation does this, we don't have to worry about any nation expanding outward. Why would every nation, what would be the benefit of doing that? What's the idea behind it? Or why would you, how about this? Let's phrase it another way. Let's go back to the original phrasing of this. Why would a nation, like, for example, the United States, why would they not want to reduce their military? What are you always afraid of? Other countries, because even if you might do it, what are you trusting them to do? You don't know what they're going to do. Okay? And so countries are really scared of this. All right, number 5, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of colonial claims based on strict observance of a principle that determining questions of sovereignty of the interests of the population must have equal weight with the claims of the government whose title is to be determined. That's a really long explanation, so let's look at the first part. A free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of colonial claims. What do you think they want European nations to give up? Oh, yeah, not just Africa, but all over the world. Nations should give up their colonies. Let's start with that. And Wilson, if I spell this correctly, is promoting an idea he called self-determination. The idea that the people of a given nation should choose who rules them. Okay? He says, hey, ultimately, if every nation is willing to give up their colonies, okay? If every nation gives up their colonies and you let the people of a given area pick who rules over them, what's less likely to happen? Why would conflict be less likely to happen? How do colonies feel that European nations are dominating them now? They're pretty tense about that. Okay. Number 6, this one's really simple and straightforward as well. The evacuation of Russian territory. All right. This is asking who to evacuate Russian territory. Who conquered a huge chunk of Russia? Germany must leave any territory it conquered from Russia. Why do you think Woodrow Wilson put that as one of his points? Why would he insist that Germany have to leave that territory? Why would you not want that Russian territory to remain in German hands? What do you think? Well, that's why Germany would want it, but why do you not want it to remain in German hands? It's not just that. What are the type of people living in that territory? Slavs or Russians. And do you think they would resent living in a territory ruled by the Germans? And so Woodrow Wilson's like, look, the best way to maintain peace is to make sure that Russians are ruled by Russia and Germans stay ruled by Germans, and we try to keep that trend. Number 7, this is a pretty obvious one as well. Belgium, the whole world will agree, must be evacuated and restored. Who invaded Belgium at the beginning of the war? Germany must evacuate Belgium. That one's pretty straightforward. And by the way, Germany didn't, they, like, for example, they knew that Wilson, like all of his 14 points, they thought they'd all be up for negotiation. They're like, hey, we could probably agree to leave Belgium, but Russia, on the other hand, yeah, they probably wanted to hang on to that. Okay. Number 8 is going to get dicey too. All French territory should be freed and the invaded portions restored, and the wrong done to France by Prussia in 1871 in the matter of Alsace-Lorraine, which has unsettled peace of the world for nearly 50 years, should be righted. Okay. Once again, they're calling on who to give up territory? Germany must give up Alsace-Lorraine and other French lands. Germany getting asked to give up a lot here, but like I said, they thought everything was negotiable. All right. So this is what point 8's calling for, and he's referencing some history at that point. 9 is real simple. A readjustment of frontiers of Italy should be effected along lines of nationality. Okay. And to translate this one for you, you wouldn't know this one. Austria-Hungary must give up a small strip of land to Italy, which had Italian inhabitants in it. Again, it's the principle of, hey, Italians should be ruled by Italy, right? And point number 10, the peoples of Austria-Hungary, whose place among nations we wish to safeguard and assure, should be accorded the freest opportunity of autonomous development. Let's look at this first of all. Notice that Woodrow Wilson calls it the peoples of Austria-Hungary. Remember, what do we know about Austria-Hungary and the makeup of it? Toby, what do we know about it? A lot of different races and nationalities, okay? And what do they want to do? They want to give them the freest opportunity for autonomous development, meaning that, what does it mean to be autonomous, Evan? If I say you're an autonomous human being, nobody makes decisions for you. You make the decisions. You're independent on your own. And they're saying that every ethnic group in Austria-Hungary should have the opportunity to be its own nation, okay? Austria-Hungary will be broken up into smaller, more ethnic nations. And you're going to see they're going to do a good job of breaking up stuff. Right? Number 11. This one's interesting as well. Romania, Serbia, Montenegro should be evacuated. The several states of the Balkans should be friendly, etc., etc. The translation for this one, Slavic peoples should be united into one Slavic nation. Haha. All right. Fun fact: they're going to manage to get that done. They're like, hey, put all the Slavs together. All right. Number 12. The Turkish portions of the Ottoman Empire should be assured a secure sovereignty, and the nationalities which are under Turkish rule should be assured an undoubted security of life and an absolutely unmolested opportunity for autonomous development. They're saying that we want to do with the Ottoman Empire what we did with Austria-Hungary. What's that mean? Crack it open with a big hammer. The Ottoman Empire should be broken up into smaller, more ethnic nations. And believe me, breaking up the Middle East is going to turn out to be a big nightmare. Right? 13, an independent Polish state should be erected and include territories inhabited by indisputably Polish populations, which should be assured free and secure access to the sea. Anybody know where Poland, like what nation Poland was in at this point? Who always is being asked to give up land here? Germany is asked to give up land which is occupied by Polish people for them to have a Polish nation. What will we call this Polish nation? Like Poland. It's not a trick. All right. Last but certainly not least, and this was probably the most important thing that Woodrow Wilson wanted. He said, we need a general association of nations that must be formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence to great and small states alike. This is a nice way of saying we need an international peacekeeping organization to prevent large-scale conflict. He said, look, maybe we could have prevented a large-scale war like we just had if for some reason we just talked it out. If we'd followed these 14 guidelines, we could have perhaps avoided conflict. Now, do me a favor, go back and scan through, like starting like at point 5 all the way through point 13. What are all of those, like what's the commonality between those points? If you scroll, Germany is related to some of them, but you're close, but not quite there. Land, it all has to do with land, okay? And in each one of these, what is Woodrow Wilson saying we should do with that land? How should we group people together? Based on ethnicities, because he says, look, if you put French land and French people under French rule, is there less likely to be conflict? Yes. And he goes, same thing with Austria and all the different groups there, because people won't get bitter or upset or try to preserve an empire. Slavs, remember, maybe if Slavs had their own country, they wouldn't assassinate the Archduke and cause a giant problem. Okay? Germany, you know what? They've got all kinds of different peoples in there, and it's time to break them up. The Polish people needed their own state. Or if we had an international peacekeeping organization, perhaps we wouldn't worry about, I don't know, blowing each other to smithereens to solve our problems. Sir, question or? No. All right. Now that's Wilson's 14 points. And when Woodrow Wilson came up with the 14 points, like I said, a lot of nations are really happy about that. But the 14 points, you're going to realize that not everything happens the way it ought to. Okay? Germany thinks they're going to get a fair deal, but the bottom line is it's not going to be quite as fair as they want. Here's a picture, by the way, of Woodrow Wilson going to Paris, and that's where they're going to have the peace conference. So November 1918, they stop fighting, and they schedule a peace conference for Paris. Okay? And Woodrow Wilson, he's the first American president to travel overseas personally as doing this. And Wilson wanted to be in on this. Here's the thing, though. He thinks he's going to go to these meetings and be super influential because he came up with the 14 points. All right. But Great Britain and France have other ideas. Right. And one thing they decide is that Germany is going to be punished harshly. Right. At Paris, they're like, hey, we want to punish Germany for a variety of reasons. And here's how bad it is. When they have the peace conference, Germany isn't even invited to participate in the discussions. They're set at the kids' tables. Right? Does that happen to you all at holidays? Oh, yeah. Look, fun fact, I asked my mom, like, when do I get to move up from a kid table? And she's like, somebody has to die. I was like, well, that's lovely. I know. All right. Now, here's some of the things that happen, okay? Germany's not going to be included. And real quick, let's go to the 14 points and start looking at the stuff. We'll start in reverse order since we're here at the bottom, all right? Point 14, they are going to establish, and we're going to put this in green, they are going to establish a League of Nations, okay? That's what they end up calling it, this peacekeeping organization, all right? So that one gets enacted. They're like, oh, that's a good one, Wilson, good job. Poland, and by the way, since Germany's not there to even defend themselves, do you think that anybody's going to care if Germany has to give up land? No. Poland is going to happen. They're going to make Poland a nation. Do you think the Ottoman Empire, they're going to cut them any breaks? No. All right? Ottoman Empire is going to get broken up. They do allow the Slavs to have one giant country. Incidentally, they called it Yugoslavia. I'll show you a map in a minute. Austria-Hungary, broken up into several nations. Jeez. Italy gets their little piece of land. They were really whining the whole time, and I think they just gave them the land to shut them up. I'll show you that land in a minute, too. Alsace and Lorraine, another French territory, goes back to France from Germany. All right? Oh, wow. Belgium. Germany is forced to leave Belgium. The land they got from Russia, they're forced to give that up also. Right? Now, this right here, self-determination, the idea that a colony should get to choose who rules over them. Do you think that happened? Not a chance. Great Britain and France, there's no way they're giving up their colonies. We'll put this as strikeout right there too. Put a line through it. If you don't know, that's to the left, couple to the left of the highlighter, right beside underline. Right? Uh, Reducing national armaments to lowest levels. Do you think nations wanted to give up their militaries? Nope. But guess who they did surrender their military? Germany. You're going to find out they got some really harsh conditions with their military. So we're not enacting that. All right. Do you think they removed trade barriers? Nope. That one didn't get enacted either. Right. Freedom of the seas. That did happen till not till later on. And the whole thing about covenants, in fact, this open covenants, things like that, people still made some backroom deals, and that largely didn't happen. Right. And absolute freedom or navigation of the seas, not so much. We couldn't guarantee that. So basically, you get your first five that kind of get shot down, but all the stuff that forced Germany to give up land definitely had to happen. Okay. Now, all that stuff gets enacted, but it's going to get worse. Okay. And Germany, their punishment is not just having to give up land. The punishment's going to get worse. Here's what happens to their military. Okay. Their army gets reduced down to 100,000 men, right? And that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but when you're military, when you're used to having millions of people serving in your armed forces, which they did in World War I, 100,000 is nothing, okay? And Germany's like, well, how do we defend ourselves from other nations? And they're like, don't make them angry, all right? Their navy, the size of their navy was reduced to 6 ships. And take a guess what types of ships they were not allowed to have. Nope. What were they doing? What is it? U-boats. No U-boats allowed. So they were down to 6 ships. They had no U-boats allowed. No Air Force either. Not allowed to have an Air Force. Right? So their military gets completely, it's like getting a stab to the throat. Right? So they got to give up a bunch of land. Okay? They have to reduce the size of their military. Right? The next thing that's going to be part of Germany's punishment is they have to pay for the war. All right. Now, here's the thing, and I don't know how you calculate this, but France and Great Britain probably calculated damage from land, loss of compensation of the number of people who died, et cetera, calculate all that, carry the one. But the number they come up with is in the neighborhood of like $35 billion. Right. And this is in 1919. So, and they also told Germany, they're like, you also have to pay it in gold. And Germany's like, well, where are we supposed to get that money from? And they're like, not our problem. Oof, oof, it's painful, right? What else can they pile on this humiliation? One more thing. Germany had to accept blame for starting the war. No, it's not a given. Germany's humiliated. Look, once again, they got to give up a huge chunk of land. They had to give up land that they conquered in Russia. They had to give up land to their mortal enemy, France. All right. They got to give up land that was already theirs prior to in Poland. I mean, not only that, their military is reduced to next to nothing. It's like they've been neutered. All right. Their military is next to nothing. No Air Force, hardly any Navy. And this is a nation that really values their military service as well. Okay. Then they have to pay for the war, which they have to pay in gold. And the Allies were like, "Don't worry about it. All right, we're going to let you pay it over time. It's not all due at once." Wow, mighty nice of you. All right. Then on top of that, you have to take blame for the war. Okay, the war guilt clause, and they put all kinds of restrictions on them, but those highlight the real problems. And the treaty that's the result is the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, and look, here's the final insult for Germany. This Treaty of Versailles, they call it that because it was signed at the Versailles Palace, and that was the same palace that Kaiser Wilhelm I and his German Empire were crowned at the end of the Franco-Prussian War. And you better believe the French remembered that, and they're like, you know what? You remember when you spiked the ball on our field and crowned your Kaiser here? Well, now you're going to have to accept this Treaty of Versailles, which punishes you terribly. And how do you think the Germans feel about this? There's so much bitterness, so much bitterness. All right. Now, somebody the other day asked a good question. They're like, hey, how come Germany didn't like say, hey, we'll just continue fighting? And at this point, they'd already demobilized their military and sent their soldiers home. They didn't think they were going to get such a bad deal at the Paris Peace Conference. And when you look at the European map, you're going to see that a lot of things get carved up. You can see Germany is reduced down to that size, and see where Poland is. You can see that Poland is taking up a huge chunk of land, and Czechoslovakia is made up of Czechs and Slovaks. Okay, they're both Slavic type people, so it works out nicely. Uh, Austria and Hungary are both broken apart. You can see that part of that empire goes to Yugoslavia. You can see that Romania and Bulgaria are intact. Italy did get some of them, and here's a side-by-side comparison of before and after. All right, that you get Poland over there and Czechoslovakia. Poor Austria-Hungary, they get the boot, man. So it's like, hey, the empire that we broke up the band. Okay, that's a good place for us to stop right there, people.